Hi everyone, we'll just wait a couple of minutes just to make sure that we've got everybody joining, and then we'll make a start. We make a start anyway. As people are joining, they can catch up. So afternoon everybody, and welcome to the Get Noticed, Get Hired webinar. I mean, the aim of today is just to really focus on giving our industry tips, discuss sort of what's getting people hired, and hopefully helping at least some of you secure your next role. I'm speaking with countless professionals in the market, and we were just having this chat before we joined the meeting as well. It's a big struggle in the market at the moment. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of individuals, good individuals, looking for work, which means we need to really stand out from the crowd. So what we do within this webinar is run through CV writing tips, how to effectively apply for a role, because that's quite important, interview tips and tricks, and then how to follow up those like a pro. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A as well. So joining me are two industry legends. We've got Caitlin and Nigel. So Caitlin, you've been in recruitment for 10 years. Your main sort of forte is scaling sort of high performing teams from pre-seed all the way through to Series B. And I know you're very hot on diversity and building inclusive workplaces. So thanks for joining.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
No worries. And Nigel, global talent leader. Not only that, a career coach, public speaker, and author. So very busy. And throughout your career, Nigel, you've helped over 10,000 candidates secure new roles. So, yeah, thanks for joining as well. I'm sure between us three, we can help some people out.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here, and thanks a lot, Dane. Looking forward to contributing and seeing what we can do to help.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to structure the webinar to go across sort of CV writing, like I mentioned. So if we start there, and I think what could be interesting, maybe Caitlin, if you could start. I'm sure you received thousands of applications and have done throughout your career in talent, right? So what really stands out on a CV for you? I know that's quite an open question, so we can pull that apart as well as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing I tend to look at on a CV is like the layout and the format of it. Like, is it clear? Is it using like plain English? Because sometimes people can like overthink and overcomplicate, and that's absolutely not what like recruiters look for on a CV. But apart from that, the most important thing is metrics. So like, for me, I have quite a, I guess, like unorthodox approach to recruitment. So I don't want to know what you're responsible for, especially within tech. I want to know the impact that you've made in that organization. So I want to know what you did, how you moved the needle on, I don't know, like goal A versus goal B, and how that had like the wider impact into an organization. Bullet points are great as well, like as a way to kind of like structure the format of a CV. But keep it just really high level, and yeah, really kind of like I say, plain English. We can get into the nitty gritty in an interview, so areas that you've had exposure to and things like that. But I think less is more on a CV in the nicest way possible. Just keep it really kind of like metric and impact driven.
Yeah, so it's more about what the outcomes of what you've done is, rather than listing your 50 responsibilities, because I think that could go on and on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're looking to go into like the similar industry to where I am, like tech scale ups, you wear so many different hats that if I was to list everything that I covered in my job role, it'd be like 4 or 5 pages long, and that's not like a good use of anyone's time sifting through that. So yeah, definitely, like I say, like the impact that you've made is a real kind of like good thing to have on there.
Yeah, makes sense. What about yourself, Nigel?
Yeah, look, I think just to echo what Caitlin said, absolutely right. I think the best way to look at the CV is it's like the movie trailer. You're not putting the whole movie together, and nobody wants to see all of that. You just want to see the nice bits that have there. Look, we've all probably say this from a candidate point of view. Probably what's crucial is I would, the best advice I could always give in regards to putting CV together and getting it out there, it is not a one size fits all. Is you have to customize your CV and fit it to whatever role that you're applying. Now I know that means it's more work, and I'm sad to say that probably the ongoing theme throughout today will be that we're probably going to say, look, hunting for a job at the moment isn't easy, and it is going to be hard work. And so a lot of the advice we'll probably give you today probably means you as a candidate is going to have to put a lot of hard yards in. But absolutely, I think from the CV perspective, really see and understand what it is you're applying to. What is the role? What are they looking for? What are the skill sets that you've done that will add value to that? Ideally, it's not necessarily, as Caitlin said, not a great big long list of what you've achieved in the past. It's about that the person who's hiring, the recruiter, hiring manager, can see really quickly what value you bring to them, to the new role. What can you actually achieve there? So I think that's super important.
Yeah, makes sense. And it goes down to tailoring that, like I think you both just mentioned. So would you suggest having a large master CV with absolutely everything you've done on it, and then maybe a shorter CV to send to recruiters, but then off the back of that, from your master CV, to tailor a specific CV with those responsibilities for that job role?
Look, it's a good idea. There's a number of different ways I think you can do it. A lot of it, to be honest, is probably how each of us sort of work. We're all fairly unique in the way that we like to work it. I would also stress, there's a big discussion over ChatGPT, CV templates, all of this kind of stuff. CV, and also I think a lot of people I've noticed have come to me and asked me recently about CV writing services, people that will offer paid services of that. Don't touch them at all. You really don't need to do that. To be quite honest with you, ChatGPT is your friend, but there's a big but to it. Make sure that when you're utilizing that, you make it authentic, you make it personal, you put it into English, proper English. So you take away all the bits there. You can do it that you have a master one and then you just adapt it if it's easy to do, or you can just change it based on every single role. Whatever works effectively for you, I think is a good way to do it.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think ChatGPT is quite interesting. Do you both receive CVs that you can tell that it's been written by that, or is it getting a little bit more intelligent, where it's bringing sort of personalities through, etc.? Because when it first came out, I would get a lot of very similar CVs, and it's just a bit like, I kind of know.
Yeah, I think similar CVs, but also similar cover letters. I think cover letters is like the real indicator. And also, like, for goodness sake, move like the double hyphen, because it just gives it away. Whenever I see the double hyphen in anything, like, it's so obvious that ChatGPT has written whatever format you send in. I am a big fan of ChatGPT. I use it every single day, and it's great to bounce ideas off. It's great to kind of proofread things, but like Nigel said very correctly, like, you need to make sure that you have personalized what it's given you to put like your own take on it. So I would use it, but use it with caution.
Yeah, completely. And I think from my point of view, Dane, yeah, I see countless examples of people using ChatGPT all the time. And I would hasten to add, not just from CVs, but also from hiring managers when they're producing their job descriptions, which is always fun. So I always encourage all of my recruiters to say, look, you need to take all of that, and then which is fine, but you need to take it out and personalize it and make it in our format and etc. So yeah, I'm again a real strong advocate of utilizing technology to help you. It will make your applications for the roles that you're going for so much better and so much more effective. I know we'll get to it, but I'd also add in here about CVs and applying for jobs, that the overarching thing that I think will give you an advantage over just applying. If your strategy is just applying for jobs, then you're in for the long haul. You're going to be here a long time if you're going to try and get a job that way. LinkedIn is the #1 tool that we all need to get to grips with, and all job seekers need to understand now, how do you do your branding with it? What do you need to do? So you're still going to have to apply for jobs. That's still going to happen, but be selective where you're doing that. And then it's also then what's your follow-up strategy? What do you do before that? And all of that strategy is around your branding on LinkedIn. And I know we can talk about that later, but that's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Caitlin, you mentioned cover letters. So that's always a grey area for application. Some people like them, some people really don't like them. So is that a must, do you think, or?
No, get them in the bin. I am so fed up of cover letters. I don't read them, in all honesty, and it frustrates me that a lot of other organisations require them, because again, it's an additional step for a candidate to need to do when they're applying for multiple jobs. And some of the cover letters like really go into detail and have like, you know, pre-populated questions and things like that. I just want to see the CV, and if I like the look of the CV, I will invest the time and I will schedule a call to speak to that candidate. But yeah, for me, cover letters, get them in the bin.
Yeah. What's your opinion, Nigel?
I hate to sound like we're all agreeing on everything, but yeah, cover letters, absolutely 100% forget about it. They even in organizations, I can tell you now, I have consulted with very large tech firms where they specifically require cover letters. Having gone into that tech firm and looked at it and analyzed it, hardly anybody was looking at them. Literally 99% of hiring managers and recruiters would not look at the cover letters. So they are pointless. Now, I appreciate there are some roles that you will apply for where they insist. So some will still do that. If you're applying for areas like academia, education, some more traditional public sector role, they will probably still require it as well. And in the short term, if that's what you need to do, then fine, you need to do it. But from my perspective, yeah, it's a complete waste of time. Again, without sounding like a broken record, you know, LinkedIn is your new cover letter, is your new CV. That's the way that you're going to get viewed. That's the way you're going to get that visibility far more effectively than a cover letter has ever done.
Yeah, that makes sense. So spend more time on the process, which we're going to discuss in a minute, rather than 20 minutes to half an hour or even more on a cover letter, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, makes sense.
Unless what I would say, Dan, is, and my strong advice, I'm sure Caitlin would probably say the same thing, unless you absolutely have to, do not do them. Just save your time completely. There's no need for them.
Yeah, so I think some ATS systems, we'll talk about ATS in a bit, but some ATS systems do require a cover letter. So I suppose on that perspective, yes, you're going to have to. So if so, how would you keep that short and sweet? What would your opinions be around that if you have to put one on?
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely keep it short and sweet.
Yeah.
And this is a great way you can leverage ChatGPT. And I would put in the full job description. I would also put in my CV, and I would ask for I'd create a prompt and ask for ChatGPT to basically like cross the T, dot the I's, other way around. But I would ask them to kind of like create it and again personalize it myself once they've created it. But something like that can take you 5 minutes. So that would be my approach if it's required.
Yeah, makes sense, because I think it's doing that work in the background whilst you can focus on the more important things, isn't it? So as a CV as a whole, then good layout. So I would assume, and we can obviously discuss this, a short personal profile. And this can cover all roles, right? So short personal profile, a little bit around key skills, and then your career history, and maybe under that career history, right, things like key achievements, etc., and really focus on keeping it brief.
Yeah, look, I think so. You know, I'm probably a little bit more radical, so I would probably look at it from a point of view of, and I appreciate that it's not for everyone. Sometimes I think you look at the different roles. If people are really insisting on cover letters, and they're still in that frame of mind to do that, I would probably look at it and think, do I really want to apply for that role? Is that one that is going to suit me? That's what I'm looking at, what I'm trying to achieve. So that's a determination you have to do. As I say, you know, what I advocate is that just purely going down the road of applications is not really going to be the best way to find a new job. You have to engage with different people, whether it's recruiters, whether it's your network, whether employee referrals, and obviously LinkedIn. But if you're of the frame of mind that you need to do it, I think, look, the advice there is absolutely spot on. Look, utilize ChatGPT. You can put in a pretty basic prompt to be able to help you to do that. Personalize it, keep it short. The cover letter needs to be super short. The irony is, the thing is, I've been saying this for a long time, so it's been like decades, even prior to ChatGPT. The cover letter came into being back in Victorian times, when it's the only way they could apply for a job. Dear sir, it come to my attention that you are looking for a new sheep shearer. That's what they did. And the irony and the strange thing is that recruiting hasn't really moved on a lot. We've held on to a lot of really outdated structures and processes. The bit that I think is clear is that we will all probably agree on this, is that the recruiting industry is rapidly changing. Like a lot of things are happening in technology across the board, and recruiting's no different. But I think this is a real step change that's going to happen. There will be a little bit of a lag between that point where we get to where actually LinkedIn branding solely is going to be the way, and people reaching out and finding the right candidates. But I think it is moving much more proactively to that way. So that's why it's going to be so important that you get visibility, that people can see who you are, what your skills are, what value you bring. And as I say, LinkedIn is absolutely your shop front to be able to do that, not the traditional CV.
Yeah, perfect. And I think just a final point on CVs before we move on to how do we apply for the roles and get noticed is, from my perspective, I tend to recruit for a lot of sales individuals. And the amount of times that I don't see much context on there. And what I mean by that is the achievements would be, I've overachieved 110% of my target, but that would be it. So what is your target? Achieving 110% of 100K is great, but if you was achieving 110% of $1 million, that's different. It shows you're an enterprise level salesperson. It shows that you're used to the long, complex deals rather than the other one, right? So for me, it's about context. And I have got a sales CV template that I can share with whoever wants it afterwards. Just drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to do that. But I think we're there with CVs. There's some good advice, and yeah, any questions that crop up from that we can discuss at the end. So the application process. Actually identifying and applying for a role. And I think this is probably one of the most frustrating parts of the job search at the moment, especially with the use of AI. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of different AI tech which lets people send hundreds of applications at once, which I found out last week, which is interesting. So a lot of individuals aren't getting noticed. So Nigel, I think to start with you, what would you say best practice would be for the application process, and obviously that follow-up process as well?
Yeah, look, it's really good, and I'd agree with you. We probably all might have seen those adverts for AI as well, that we can apply to hundreds of roles for you on your behalf. I saw this, and I was chatting to a colleague of mine over in the US. They had over 1,000 applications turn up in 24 hours for a software developer role. And the pain point was that at least 50% of it he's looked at is these are just bots that are just throwing stuff in that has no relevance whatsoever. So again, if you feel tempted by some of those AI solutions, seriously, that's probably a really bad move to do. So don't get tempted on that side of things. Look, follow up and where it is super important, I think, for getting your CV out there, what it is. Now, the traditional way that we've probably always known about it has been you send an email, you send something, you directly message somebody, which is sort of fine. But you know what? That's just sort of adding, especially for recruiters and hiring managers, it just adds more noise in an otherwise fairly congested time that they're all having. The way that you're going to be able to get it in the more modern world is what they call that social selling. So using your LinkedIn profile, using engagement, using your content. So for instance, when you're engaging on LinkedIn and you produce a bit of content, if you comment on 20 other pieces, you get more engagement back onto your piece of content. So the way that you utilize the network, you can get more visibility. In the same way, when you've applied for a role, producing content yourself and engaging with content that is related to the company that you've just applied for will get you more noticed. Because believe you me, when you apply, people don't tend to look at your CV or your cover letter. What they'll do is go straight to your LinkedIn profile. That's where people will look to see what's going on. And then if you're connecting with those people there, they're going to see what you're doing. That is far more powerful. And it sits there for much, much longer than if you send a quick message to somebody saying, I've applied for this role, what's happened to it? You know, that way I think is a much more effective strategy, but it isn't a one-off. So again, it's, you know, producing consistency is super important to be effective.
Right. So let's say that a candidate sent out 20 applications, right? That's quite a lot of engaging with sort of content, etc. Would that ever go against them at all, do you think? If a hiring manager sees you engaging on loads of different sort of comments and loads of different companies, would that go against them, or is that just showing proactiveness?
No, so it's about what. So taking an example, that if you're saying that you place a lot of salespeople, a lot of sales into different industries, what they're going to be looking for, if you've applied for 20 roles, probably 20 sales type roles that you've gone to, is they're looking for somebody, as you said quite rightly, look, somebody who's hitting their targets, who understands a process, who understands how to get a needs analysis, how to consult, what are the pain points of a customer, you know, so they know all of those different processes. So what you need to do is to put out content, not specifically about that company or what it is, but about your expertise, sharing to your network, sharing that expertise. And what you're doing is demonstrating as soon as somebody looks at it and thinks, wow, that person really does understand the sales process. They're really an expert. They really clearly understand what the pain points of a customer is, how to actually close a deal, what to do on that. So you're providing things for free out to your network and asking nothing in return. But what you're actually doing is demonstrating to everybody out there how good you are at your job. And that's what's going to help you get the interviews, actually get seen, and hopefully get the offer at the end of it.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And Caitlin, I'm sure that as soon as you advertise a role, etc., you'll get a lot of, obviously, applications for one, but a lot of people following up. So let's say they were to send a follow-up message. What sort of content would you want behind that? Obviously, bar what Nigel mentioned around the whole personal branding piece, what direct message could be the best sort of attention grabber as such?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had some applications recently where they've not just sent a message, they've gone a little bit more outside of the box. So they've created Notion pages, which kind of like goes into a bit more detail on their experience and how it's relevant to the role. They've created Trumpets, which it's basically a digital sales room, but they've kind of like utilized that. You can download it for free, actually. You can download a free version. I would recommend anyone do it. And it basically will create you like a mini site, and within that you can showcase your skills, and it's really interactive. There's also great analytics on it. I'm not on commission for Trumpet, by the way, but there's great analytics in the back where you can actually see if somebody's like logged on and viewed it. You can see what pages they've clicked on. I've had a lot of salespeople use them, and then they follow up saying, oh, I noticed you viewed my Trumpet, like, any thoughts? And you don't want to, I think, don't kind of not acknowledge the psychology behind recruitment. Like, I don't want anyone to think I'm rude. So if I know that somebody's noticed that I've seen something, I will just instinctively want to follow up on that conversation. So anything that you can do to leverage kind of like other software as well, it just looks like you are, especially if you're applying for a role in tech, it just looks like you are very like aware of the tooling that's out there. So I always think that is kind of a great way to follow up.
Yeah, makes sense. So they're good ways to follow up. What should we stay away from doing? What annoys me a little bit is sort of comments just saying I'm interested, but that's a personal opinion. I get it. Yeah, you probably are because you applied for the role. But what should individuals stay away from? I know obviously a lot of people are now starting to veer around to try and find the hiring managers and approach them directly. What's your opinion? What would you say the worst way of following up a role is?
I think when it's when you reach out before you apply, very similar to as you've described, saying I'm interested. I always kind of think like, are you trying to jump the queue? Like in a way, like apply and then we can have a conversation about it. I think there's a lot more confidence and conviction when somebody messages like, I've applied for this role. This is why I think I'm going to be good, like a good contender. So I would stay away from, probably like reaching out prior to applying.
Makes sense. What about yourself, Nigel?
Yeah, look, I agree. I mean, certainly, I'd echo what you said, Dane. If you're just putting following up, or I've applied, or something like that, that's probably not going to be useful. Perhaps not be, our temptation, and especially if you look, I appreciate for some of us, it's horrible. It's stressful. You wondering how you're going to pay the mortgage, and the longer it goes on, and we're in a tough market. So your temptation is to go out in proper sales mode and really push hard. Now, ironically, that's probably the worst thing you can do. The more pushy you are, the more it's just not going to work. I would probably say 20, 30 years ago, I would be saying the opposite. I would probably be saying, get on the phone, go and speak to them, connect with them, because that's what it was like back then. And you probably would have had a much better audience by doing it that way. So look, again, without sounding like a broken record, and like Caitlin said, I'm not getting paid by LinkedIn to promote LinkedIn, sadly, because they've got quite a lot of money, but they don't put any of it my way. But look, I would utilize that network really well. It will take a long time for you to build it up, and consistency and everything else. But if you max out on it and go into that, it's amazing how quick you can get traction on it and how you can get a lot of visibility. To my mind, it's as simple that I would look at it. It's sort of logically that I want to try and get, if I was in a job search situation tomorrow, where would I go? Where would I put my effort into it? How am I going to follow up? How am I going to try and get myself interviews? How am I going to get an offer? As many, hopefully several. But what do I do? And I would utilize something that has a reach of 1.2 billion people. The network that we have now, technology is your friend. So when we're saying utilize ChatGPT is great technology to use for that, utilize the biggest tool on the planet that will get you seen. Admittedly, you might have to pay for premium, but in reality, if you're putting content up there, it is free. And they're not charging you to do that, and you will get seen if you do it correctly. So that will probably be my best advice. I think you can go.
That makes sense. And I think before we move on to interviewing, this is a question I was going to ask, because I've never dealt with the behind the scenes on a ATS system, right? And a lot of people are applying for ATSs, applying through LinkedIn, and just getting completely blanked, completely ghosted. Well, a couple of questions really around that. One, why do you think that's happening? And two, how could somebody, hopefully by utilising what we're discussing now to knock that, how can somebody overcome that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the first one, it is probably the number one complaint of candidates is getting ghosted, that you apply for jobs. Not that I think this is normal, but a colleague of mine, I worked for a while over in the Caribbean. I was very fortunate to have a role based in the Cayman Islands for a year, which I know I've had some tough gigs in my time. That was a real hard one. But I got to know quite a few people over there. One of the people I work with, he actually posted up on LinkedIn that he had just got a notification of a job he'd applied for quite some time ago, saying he'd been rejected. He applied for it in 2014. So, it's taken 11 years for them to, he's been ghosted for 11 years, and clearly they must have had some clear out of the system and decided to reject him. But the reality is that happens a lot, and it can happen for a couple of different reasons. One, because they've not set up their systems correctly to communicate. So often a lot of organizations will have Workday or Greenhouse or whatever, and the systems are there that they can do it, and they can reject people and they can send communications out. They've just not set it up properly to do it. Secondly, they can be overwhelmed. So at the moment, they're overwhelmed by the volume of applications. We've seen quite often there's hundreds, if not thousands of roles. You only have to go onto LinkedIn and it'll tell you what the applicant count is. You can see there's a lot. And so sometimes the recruiters are overwhelmed, And then sometimes you get recruiters who are all nice people, believe it or not, and an awful lot of them don't like dealing with rejection. They hate it. I know, which is a strange business that we're in. But of course, 99% of the candidates that we deal with, we have to reject. And so again, in my organization, we've set up systems to make sure that we're constantly communicating with people. We have SLAs in place to make sure that people, once they're moved forward, they're communicated with, that they're either gone through or they're not. But there will be, and this again is probably another thing that we'll come to, is there's going to be more and more systems that will start to be involved that will probably reject people quickly, because systems are going to start to analyze and see whether or not it's in its infancy now. But for sure, it's a massive problem. And I think for candidates, it's probably one of the biggest headaches that people have, of the amount that you can apply for and you just hear nothing back.
100%. And I think from my perspective, obviously I recruit multiple roles at multiple times, like we both do. I'll give an example. So 3 days ago, I think it was, I advertised a cybersecurity business development manager. Within 48 hours, I think got 500 responses, which is overwhelming for one. And I'm not saying I'm not going to get back to everyone, but that's going to take a bit of time, right? But that's 1 of 10 roles. So it is quite a difficult one. However, the individuals that follow the process that we're speaking about now, obviously, having a tailored CV that does really match that job description, has sent maybe a polite follow-up to me, has obviously engaged on that personal branding, like you mentioned, without a doubt, I'll be getting back to them. It's those individuals that really are putting in that effort that I can help. But it does take a long time. It's 30 seconds to 30 to a minute, isn't it, really, reading the CV, if you're going into a lot of detail, and times that by 500 and times that by 10, I wouldn't sleep, right? So it is so frustrating in the market that everybody's getting ghosted. But I think it's, as long as we're following those processes that we're talking about here, you're going to get a little bit better chance of getting in front of the right people.
Yeah, completely. And it is, and I would say, it is, as frustrating as it is, a lot of this is and frustrating for me, because I think it is 100% solvable especially for corporates. So if they're using the likes of Workdays and the big ATSs, the systems are all there in place that you can communicate and do that. And I think a lot of it is down to organizations having targets, having SLAs for their recruiters to say, you have to deal with, so we, for example, have, when somebody's applied, 48 hours, they get a response within 48 hours. Once they've then moved forward to the next stage, is then 10 working days. And we communicate to the candidates to say, congratulations, you've gone through, it's 10 working days, we'll be back in touch with you. And believe you me, if candidates don't get that, they send you an email to say, you said it would be 10 working days, it's now 12, and I'm still waiting. And I'll just send that off to the recruiter to say, you need to speak to them. Why haven't you done that? That's what you need to do. But a lot of it is that organizations need to catch up to do that. So I appreciate the frustration is it's difficult really for candidates to sort of deal with that. I guess how they can get around that in some way is that if you see a job that you're about to apply for, whether it's on LinkedIn, Indeed, whatever it is, because they will have the applicant counts. Quite honestly, again, if it was me and I saw that there was 500 people had applied for that already, I would not bother, because you only have to do the numbers. If you think about it, a recruiter is going to look at it, have 500 candidates apply for it. In reality, you've only got to have 1% of them going to interview. What chance have you got? If you've already had that, you're way back in the queue. I would be moving on. The ideal is to try and find that job where there's no applicants, or it's only just been done. So the fresh jobs that have come out, you've got a much more chance of being seen, that's when the value of your CV starts coming into play.
Yeah. Would you agree, Caitlin?
Yeah, so I think ultimately we have to, it's down to the recruiter to run a fair and efficient process. And I think it's definitely a mindset shift for candidates applying for roles, because it's absolutely not a you thing. Like, your skill set is still valuable and will be valuable. It is a numbers game, like, and that's the frustrating thing. So I would just, as hard as it is, like, try not to take it personally, because it really is not a you thing. It's the recruiter's responsibility. And I could do a whole other webinar about like recruitment practices and best principles and SLAs. And in my team, we really hold ourselves accountable for it, and we get back to every single candidate because it's so important. But we are a scaling business and there's only 70 headcount of us, so we are a smaller org, so we're able to do that because of the numbers that we do get. But yeah, I would just say, like, don't take it personally. It's absolutely not a reflection of you and your capabilities. It is down to the organisation and the volume of applicants that they do receive.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. So we've got a good CV. We've tailored our CV. We've managed to apply for the role. We've got a call back. We're at the interview stage now. So Caitlin, what would your advice be around preparing for that interview? Because it's all about being prepared. It's taken a bit of slog to get to that stage, so we need to nail it. So what would you say the best sort of tips are about preparing for that interview?
Yeah. So my trusted friend ChatGPT would help me prep for any interview. So I would pop the job description in ChatGPT with a very simple prompt, like what interview questions could arise, and then I would plan on your own like some scenarios based off those questions that you can kind of relay back to. I think having some examples in your back pocket is really good, because you're showing that you have the lived experience of what an interviewer is going to ask you. I think other preparation would be like the STAR method is really good as a way to answer questions. And then also, like, be enthusiastic, but don't railroad the interview. So the interviewer has a set list of questions that they want to ask you that they're going to be able to extract some information from you that's going to align to the evaluation criteria that they're looking for. The worst thing you can do is like lead on that interview, because you're going to run out of time. You're not going to be able to showcase your skills. I've had interviews before where I've asked one question and I've not had the chance to ask any more because the interviewer has just kept talking and talking and talking. And I understand it is nerves, and as I'm sure you can probably tell, I don't stop talking as well. So I completely get it. But just trying to stay really structured with your answers is probably like the best thing to prepare for.
Yeah, makes complete sense, because I think it's all about that two-way conversation, right? Not just the one-way one. What about yourself, Nigel?
Yeah, look, it's fab advice, Caitlin. Absolutely right. I would add a couple of things. So first of all, as well as the sort of the ChatGPT, which I think is absolutely right to get that prepped, do some preparation work. So have a look on the company that you're going to, have a look at the person who's going to be who's going to be interviewing you, see what they've engaged with online. So see what things are important to them. What are the things that you can, so the likely kind of questions you're going to get. I'm a real advocate in practice makes perfect. So I've always been told never use sporting analogies and not cricket analogies, otherwise, because half your audience will never know what's going on. But I'm going to anyway. If you're in cricket, if you're a batsman, you get in the nets and you practice and you practice and you practice and you keep on doing it, keep repeating it, so that then becomes natural. We've all got mobile phones. I'm holding up my mobile phone. It may not be nice. You're going to probably be having video interviews. You might still have in-person interviews as well, but you're probably likely to have a lot of video interviewing. Video yourself doing it, because Caitlin makes a really good point. You think that you're actually not talking super quickly, or you're not talking for 20 minutes. You think it's only a couple of minutes or 30 seconds. Incredibly, it can last a long time. And you'll really see that if you record yourself. You don't have to share it with anyone, so don't worry, no one will see it. But record yourself, do that, have a look at it. I'd also add a couple of other things with it, is watch, even though we may hate politicians, but there are some good ones out there who have been trained incredibly well, and they know how to deal with interviews. So swallow the fact that a lot of them will irritate you, but watch some of them interview. Now, again, I'm not saying what political persuasion I am, but there's some very good examples in the past. The likes of the Barack Obamas, the likes of Tony Blair back in the day. was very good because he came across as quite honest and he was quite easy to get along with. Have a look at them because they're really good. Also work out your tonality. Caitlin mentioned about the fact that you're going to be nervous. The temptation when you're nervous is to speak super quickly and really get it over with, because you have to consciously slow yourself down, really almost super slow. And the more that you do that, the more you relax in yourself, and actually to the interviewer, you'll seem much more authoritative, and that will really give you an advantage. So those are my tips.
Absolutely. I think that tonality is key as well, like you mentioned, because an interview can last half an hour and nothing's really covered and it's all been said really quick, or there's a conversation around it, like I mentioned before. So if Caitlin, if you could have 2 killer questions to ask, obviously it's going to depend on the role and the application, but what would you say are 2 killer questions that could be that individuals could use in their next interview?
Yeah. I think I would focus on like presence. So what I mean by that is like, what is a current problem that your organization's facing right now? I'd want to know like what the problem is, and then be able to leverage my skill set to help move the needle on that problem to solve it. And then I'd also want to know, and again, this is very natural being in a scaling business, I'd want to know like what the end goal is. Like, are we moving towards like an exit strategy? Do we want to be acquired? Like what is that North Star? And again, being able to kind of like understand how I'm going to impact that. So those would probably be the two killer questions that I'd ask. I'd want to know like what's happening right now, and then future, what are we working towards?
Yeah, perfect. Because they're not generic, right? They're actually for that business. I hear a lot of generic questions within interviews. Things I know that it's good to know, but things like, what's the culture like? I mean, what's the working hours? Obviously, salary would have been discussed anyway. Or what's the progression? Those are the 3 things that I hear on a daily basis when interviewing candidates about businesses, but also for us. Yeah, again, good questions, but are they going to make you stand out from the crowd? Probably not. What's your opinion, Nigel?
Yeah, I agree. Look, I think absolutely, to Caitlin's first point, superb question. I think, the question about finding the real pain point, and I would do it, make it super personal. So for the person interviewing you, if you're interviewing for their area, really find out what's the bit that's keeping them awake at night. What's the real issue that you've got in your team? What's the real issue that's happening? Whether it's a sales issue, an accounts issue, it doesn't really matter. And then it'll prompt a real good discussion there, and that gives you that opportunity to be able to really show and demonstrate the value that you can bring in solving those issues. What you want to do is see that the interviewer is going to already start picturing you solving the problem. It's somebody who's already a partner. And if you're getting to that stage, that's when you start having an advantage over everyone else. Because you're absolutely right, Dane. Albeit that probably in the past we'll say, oh, it's great questions to ask about the culture and everything, and that shows an interest in it. My advice to every candidate is, however tempted you feel about asking about the times that it works, how much money it pays, never ask it. Never ask it. Because look, you're going to find out about that anyway. Hopefully, if you've done your due diligence up front with the internal recruiter, the recruitment from the agency, they will inform you of all of that. But during the actual interview process, it's a path that exactly that. You're just going to look like everybody else. You're not differentiating yourself, and you want to be seen as somebody who is a problem solver, somebody who can add value to it, not somebody who's just looking for a job. There's a big difference.
Yeah. Makes complete sense and good points. I mean, before we move on to our Q&A, there's one sort of final question I want to ask around interviews, and maybe I'll give my example of what I would say at the end of an interview. It could be totally wrong, so it'd be good to hear your opinions. To closing an interview, so really having that killer close. And what I tend to suggest is asking either the hiring manager or talent, do they have any reservations about your background or anything you've mentioned before sort of moving on. The reason why I would say to ask that sort of question is you might not have covered something that was in the job application or the job spec that you have done before that you can then sort of go over again. If there was a reservation about something that you may have misinformed throughout the interview, it's good to just cover that off, in my opinion. So, Nigel, what would you say that the killer close would be to help you secure that next round, if it went well, obviously?
Yeah, look, it's I love the fact that you bring that one up because it's old school. I'm like that as well. I must admit, I've probably spent the majority of my recruiting life saying exactly that, just check, is there any reservations you've got? Is there anything we've not covered? As I evolve, it's sometimes I often look and think, is there a place for that in the future of where we're at? And look, I think for the time being, it's still a good one. It's not one that is going to get you into trouble for it. It's not going to be one, and I know it can feel quite uncomfortable for people to ask that question. And what I would recommend is that the way that you can ask that doesn't feel uncomfortable again is preparing and checking and rehearsing it. Check in ChatGPT, ask it for options. Give me a list of different ways that I can ask this question. It'll give you 20, 30 different types of ways to do it. Look for the one that is more comfortable for you, that is sort of suits your character, your personality. And then the trick to it is not to make it sound rehearsed, but to make it sound like it's very natural, part of the conversation that you've been having. And if you do that, I think, the real key for an interview and where it can be super successful is where it is a conversation, where it's a two-way thing. And if you can get to that point with it, asking those kind of questions will be super useful. And of course, if there is something that there's missed or something that the hiring manager's got on their mind, they might well be tempted to be able to say, well, actually, I wasn't sure about this. We've got a problem in this area, and I know that's not something that you can do. And then you might say, well, actually, no, we just haven't talked about it. Actually, I've had a very similar issue before. This is how we did it, and you can go through your style method of going through and resolving that particular query. But yeah, that's what I'd do.
It's certainly the way you say. It's not any red flags. Am I being progressed? When should we meet? Right? It's that tonality and the way you say that conversation.
Definitely.
Caitlin, do you have any other killer closes?
Honestly, I hate that question. Very controversial, but I hate that question.
I told you it's changing, isn't it? I think it's a real old school question, and I know is the funny thing is, I'm like you, Caitlin. That I look and think, do you think we should still be using that now? But I still think I can probably do it. But I'd be fascinated to hear what you think instead.
Yeah, you know what? I think you can get away with it. Like, I'm not insulted when anyone asks me that question, but I do always say that I know, especially if they come via an agency, I'm like, I know the agency have prepped you to ask that question. In sales, like, it's like if you don't close that interview, like you're not showing that you can close a sale. So I completely get it, and like we all kind of have come from agencies, so we understand. I think for me, I, as an interviewer, really like to reflect on an interview and like to go back to the evaluation criteria and really look at my notes and compare. So I am quite mean and don't give them an answer when they ask that question. What I do tend to kind of go back to them and say is like, I would actually ask you to really reflect the same on everything that I've said, because it's very much a two-way street, and you have to be equally as bought into Legal, the company that I work for right now, as myself being bought into you as a candidate, because we're not an easy organization. We challenge and we expect a lot of our people. We are high performance, and I try to make that really transparent in the interview so that at the end it's as much as me reflecting as it is the candidate. Not every recruiter is like me. I know that I am quite different, but I would follow up. I would definitely kind of like end the conversation just being polite and say like, I've really enjoyed the conversation, would love to know a bit more about next steps and that sort of thing. But also like the old saying, treat them mean, keep them keen type of thing. Like, as well as us having, as recruiters, having lots of options of candidates, you want to give off the impression that you've got lots of options when it comes to other roles as well. And I would keep your cards close to your chest in that sense. But But yeah, I guess I've got a bit of a different approach than you guys. But either is fine, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I've asked that question to a lot of contacts that I know and who I recruit for, and it is usually a 50-50 divide. That's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
But no, it makes sense. No, appreciate that. So look, we've covered quite a lot before we get onto the Q&A. So CV writing, a strong layout. I can send over the CV template that I have as well. Context is important. It's really important to tailor that per advert or per application you're making. Once you get to that application stage, it's obviously making sure there is that polite follow-up, being sort of engaging on your LinkedIn is quite important these days as well. And then once you get to the hiring table, it's about being concise, it's conversational. I know we talked about tonality, not over sort of sharing and not speaking really quickly, and having that bit of a polite close. I don't know if I've missed anything there. I have tried got everything we've just covered.
You've done well. You've done well.
Not bad. Fine. Okay, so there's been a few questions, and thanks guys for sharing your opinions and thoughts as well. I'm sure it's super helpful. So I'm going to pick out a couple of questions, and feel free to drop them into the chat as well. There was a question around CVs and how many pages are recommended.
I would say 2. If you can condense it to 2 pages, that would be a much easier process. I have to admit, if I see a CV that's like 4 or 5 pages, I will review it, but I'm a bit like, oh, this is long.
Yeah. Look, similarly, there's, as I said right at the beginning of this session, it's a movie trailer, not a movie. So you don't need to put a lot of in there. Don't stress it that whether I have to try and get it below 2 or I've got to get it to 1. If you're in the US, it's very much a 1-pager. So if it goes to 3, it goes to 3. So the big thing I would say is that I wouldn't over worry it, but brevity is better. It's more important also. So don't feel like you need to squeeze everything into 2 pages and you make it unreadable. So the real key to it is a marketing document, and it's only there for one reason, which is to get you an interview. That's it. That's all its purpose is. It's not going to get you the job. That's all part of the interview process. We'll do that. So I wouldn't stress about it too much though.
Yeah.
I love that saying, Nigel. I'm going to copy that. It's a movie trailer, not a movie.
I can't say that I made it up. I nicked it from someone else. But I can't remember who it is, so I can't name check them.
There was a question, I think I'll be able to answer this one as well. There's a question on people posting personal stories after applying for a LinkedIn advert. I think LinkedIn's not really for personal. Yes, you can sort of really engage sort of who you're about on there, but that's different social media, right? It's you're not going to get a job because you're going out for a run sort of thing. You probably agree with that, guys, right?
I hate to be contrary, but you know what? LinkedIn's changed. So absolutely, even maybe 6 years ago, but even 5 years, maybe even 3 years ago. But when LinkedIn started out, it was super professional, super this and everything else. LinkedIn has changed, and the whole ethos of it has changed. And since Microsoft have taken over, they've increased their functionality and what they do. The real key to branding on LinkedIn is to be authentic, to be yourself, to share what you're comfortable sharing. So it's not like you have to overshare that, you don't need to put your kids or this, that, the other. You do whatever you need to do. If it's important to you that you want to talk about, in fact, I've gone for a run, I've gone and done this, I've achieved this, put it up. Absolutely. I think, what you've got to do is have content that's interesting, that people want to look at. The way that I describe LinkedIn and the best way to do it, it's like having a conversation I know it's the old days, but in the old days, when you used to go to the kitchen kettle, go and make yourself a cup of tea, would you just go up to somebody, one of your colleagues, and say, I've got this white paper that I'd like you to look at. I think you'll find it very, very interesting. Or I've got this job I'm looking. No, you'd say, oh, guess what I did at the weekend? I went for this really long run, and you never believe it. I went over on my ankle and it's really, really painful. I got myself a new puppy. Or they might say, actually, I'm going for a new job here. And, that job that you're doing. So it's a mixture. Treat LinkedIn like the office kitchen. But when you're having those kind of conversations, it has absolutely changed. And the algorithms and everything that LinkedIn are pushing is more about how you're getting engagement. It's not about follower count anymore or anything like that. It's about, are you doing something that people find interesting? And the best way that I would describe it is, look, just try it out, do what you're feeling is comfortable, but start to then share that. And it's going to be different from everyone. So then you might not want to share any of your personal stuff. That's fine. You share what is comfortable for you. I might want to share everything about my personal life. I won't, but and that's fine as well. So LinkedIn is definitely changing.
Yeah, absolutely. To be fair, I've contradicted myself there because I've made a lot of posts about the London Marathon that I ran this year. So don't worry about that comment I made. There was a good question around recruiters not being open with salary brackets. So let's say you're progressing through interviews, but recruiters aren't being open with their salary brackets. Should you still avoid asking about the salaries? In my opinion, I think usually at that first stage, recruiters do mention salary brackets, right? But what happens? Would you ask that question in an interview if you didn't know what the salary was? Because quite a lot of adverts don't have salaries on them, right?
Yeah, I definitely asked the question. I remember way like years and years ago when I was interviewing for a new role, and I applied for something that I thought was going to be the same as what I were expecting because of the job title. And when I had the first call with the recruiter, it was quite substantially lower than what I was expecting. And that was like 10 minutes into the conversation that we was able to clarify that. And I think that's really important because I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to waste my own time. So I would definitely ask the question. And I think as well, it's confidence and conviction in your skill set and your abilities of what you can contribute to that role and that organization. And I would just be very clear and upfront about it. And I don't think it's taboo. I know it used to be. I know it didn't used to be polite to talk about it, but that in certain parts of the world, it's like a legal requirement to publish salaries. And I do not see that in 10 years' time, the UK will not also have that regulation. So I would ask the question, absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. And on salaries, so there, like we mentioned at the start of the webinar, there are a lot of good individuals out of work at the moment. Salaries are decreasing. So if, let's say, there was a question around how do you handle a role that's effectively a 30% pay cut, but you're still happy to apply and do that role? Because the questions around expectations and what you were on before, especially in sales positions, that comes up. So how could you navigate that?
Yeah, I think just being very maybe open about your circumstances and your situation. You know, you might have gone from being a double income household to a single income household, all the other way around. So your situation might change, and therefore the requirements you need for a role might change. But there's also other ways that you can negotiate around it. You can negotiate on flexible working. You can negotiate on like annual leave, perhaps, share entitlement if the company offers shares. So there's lots of different ways that you can negotiate. But I would just be very open about the reason and address the elephant in the room and say, like, you might think that this role is maybe a step down for me. I want to explain as to why I've applied it and why I still think I'd be a good fit. So yeah, get that out of the way straight away if you can.
Yeah, just that sort of reassurance and sort of being honest about it and transparent. We have a question on ATS. Keywords, how to beat the ATS. Because a lot of people are finding that as a first hurdle, but I think it also goes into what we mentioned about ghosting, right? What would you advise, Nigel, on how to beat the ATS?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of chat about ATS stuff, and I would also let everybody know. Look, there's the systems that are in there that analyze it. There's not many AI systems. When people think that AI is going through all the ATS systems and binning you out, invariably most places don't have anything at all. There are some systems there that do keyword matching. So there is a little bit of that, but it still won't bin you out. What it does is it just gives a score. So it'll just turn around and say, there's an 80% match to the job description. And all it's literally doing is just picking out from the job description what's in the CV and does it match? Which sort of goes back that the best way of ensuring that doesn't become an issue is customizing your CV for every single application you do, which does mean, unfortunately, it's a bit more work But yeah, that will solve that issue a lot more. But it's not really the be all and end all. And even when there is keyword matching for it, I think a lot of recruiters, there's a lot of tools that recruiters have used that I've seen and I've used in the past with large corporates where the recruiters just don't trust it enough and they just don't use it. And so they still will just be instinctive. A lot of people like myself, like Caitlin, and all the people we work with will trust our knowledge and judgment of it. We can flick through a CV and understand very quickly what it is and probably trust that better than a system that is keyword matching.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we've got time for one last question, so I have one. The question is, would you advise to reapply for the same company but for a different position after being rejected after multiple round of interviews? The other role was a little bit more suitable, the newer role, so that individual wants to reapply. Would you advise that, or would you? How would you navigate that? I think for me, I would go back to if it was an internal talent and just mention, look, I've noticed you've applied for this. I know I was rejected for the last one. Here's why I think I could be a good match. But what's the best practice around that?
Yeah, I think so. From my perspective, look, if you've gone through multiple interviews, you've already been interviewed, then clearly they're going to be interested in you. So you're clearly a good match. In an ideal world, you would get those people who had already interviewed you before, you've already connected with them, you get them to introduce you to the role. So actually what I would, if it was me, I'd be trying to get a personal invitation into it. So in other words, reach back out to the people who actually interviewed you and say, oh, I saw this role. That's with one of your colleagues. Is that something that might be suitable for me? Do you think that's a good fit? Is it worth me applying for it? Invariably, a lot of these organizations will have employee referral schemes where they get rewarded for applying for. So, a lot of these things, they're going to be incentivized to do it. And that, by the way, is a really good way of also, engage your network an awful lot. I know it's slightly off topic, but look, absolutely, it's important to see who works in some of these organizations. Getting referred into it is a way of beating all of these issues that you will have. But absolutely, if you've been going through a number of interviews, the likelihood is they're going to be super interested in you again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on that note as well, obviously, if there are 10 other roles in that same company and you really want to work for that company, don't just spray your CV into all of them. Use the way that Nigel mentioned, because I know sometimes that happens. But I think, thank you both very much for joining. I appreciate your time, and I'm sure everybody's absolutely loved our tips, our tricks, and hopefully it can help a few people secure those next roles. Obviously, it's been lunchtime for you, so appreciate your time again. And if any other questions that crop up, drop me a message, and I'm sure I can speak to both Nigel and Caitlin and get those answered for you as well.
More than happy.
Perfect. Right. Thank you, Dane.
Thanks very much. Cheers. See you.